Good morning to the Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, online viewers, radio listeners via St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM and other radio stations. I'm Rolika Roach and welcome to the live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, February 27th, 2019. At this time, I invite the Minister of Public Health, Social Development and Labor, the Honorable Emil Lee, to address you. Minister Lee.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, fellow Council of Ministers, the media, those listening by radio, television, or internet. I have three topics I'd like to touch on briefly today. The first one is regarding a multifunctional shelter. So yesterday, the Council of Ministers, we agreed that in principle, we would submit plans for the development of a multifunctional shelter to the Recovery Program Bureau. That means that we'll submit the concept. We have a rough idea of what we are looking for. This needs to be further researched and developed and for a project that could possibly be funded from the recovery funds. As you all know now, currently we have shelters for hurricane on the island, but these are not specifically designed for being used as a safe haven, a refuge for during a storm, right? And these are mostly schools, community centers, and churches, and they're spread out through the different areas on the island. And there's a number of challenges that come along with this. Number one, it spreads limited human resources during a crisis, right? So you have a lot of different places. You can't possibly have medical staff or security staff, or it presents challenges that you're taking these resources and you're spreading them around the island. Many of these facilities are not designed to withstand or to be used to weather out a storm. I mean, by fact, you can see that many of the schools still have suffered damage as a result of Irma. So very clearly, in terms of being the strength of a structure that you need to be able to put people there safely during a storm is a challenge. And the other thing is, after a storm, as if people in the shelter, if their homes were damaged, they have a problem to move out. And yet, as the community is trying to recover, we're trying to restart the school program, you have a problem because you have people that are there that don't have a place to go. So that creates a challenge in the recovery phase. So as VSR, we were looking to, as part of our Build Back Better strategy, of building purpose-built and multi-purpose shelters. Original concept was that we would look at a number of smaller facilities around the island. But, you know, as we started looking at what the requirements are, and I can identify some of them, what we're looking for, we started to realize that what would be better is to look at building one large shelter, and I'll go into why we agreed with that. So number one, what we're looking for is a structure that can withstand Category 5 plus hurricanes. So basically, we're looking at a concrete bunker, a box, right? Should be able to house about 1,000 people. We should be able to separate men, women, and children in the facilities during the storm. You need storage space for cots, food, water. Ideally, you would have kitchen facilities so that you can cook food, obviously, for all of the occupants. Secure communications, enclosed parking for emergency vehicles, laundry facilities, medical facilities, generator, bathrooms, showers. So when you start looking at, ideally, a purpose-built shelter, what kinds of things would you want inside the shelter? So you want to be able to weather the storm there, so it needs to be safe, and then afterwards, in a recovery phase, you have a concentration of people together. You need to be able to take care of those people as well. So that's where you get all of the shower facilities and cooking facilities. And so when you really start looking at it, you say, okay, you now have a large concrete structure with all of these facilities inside. And as Council of Ministers, we started thinking about it and saying, you know what? This building, obviously, besides being a shelter, would be a perfect facility for sporting events, because you have a large space that you could use for sporting events. You could use it for performing arts. You could use it for cultural events. And for our Minister of TIAT, all of a sudden now we could also use it as a convention center. So one of the things that we've been looking at as a community is, how do we enhance our tourism product, right? And one of the things, you see it in Miami, for example, they have tons of conventions. All year long, they have conventions, and the hotels benefit from that. So our tourism sector would benefit from it. In the past, we've paid for the renting a tent to host the FCCA conference. We paid quite a bit of money for that event. So if we have a purpose-built building that can also serve as conventions, and they can be broken out. So we said we want to be able to break the facilities into men's and women's sections, for example. So it means the facility can be segmented, which is exactly, again, perfect for conventions. Very often conventions, they need to separate out into smaller groups and larger groups within a function. So when we really looked at it, it says, what? This is an opportunity to accomplish many things at the same time. Build a purpose-built shelter that people can safely weather a storm. It allows us to bring medical staff, security staff together, centralize food, resources in one location in a building that is safe. All of these facilities we're talking about, sporting facilities, performance arts, cultural centers, convention centers, you don't even want windows, right? Most of these facilities are really, literally, big concrete boxes, right? So perfect. Those are, again, makes the building only safer to use as a shelter. The other thing, what we've looked at, because of the size of the facility, that this might also be a solution for the library, CMARC, and museum. Depending on the land where we locate, it may be possible to locate those facilities within this structure as well, and then you have a certain amount of synergy. So if they need meeting rooms, you use meeting rooms already that's built into the facility. So I think there's a certain amount of synergy there. It also means that there would be a lot of parking spaces around, so access would be easy. And I think having one area that you have all of your cultural icons sort of centered in one location makes sense. So again, if you have a convention, it's a great opportunity to showcase the culture of the island, the museum, and all of the things. So I think there's a lot of synergy from that perspective. And the good thing is the activities that we're talking about, sporting events, performing arts, cultural events, or conventions, after a storm, these are all events that would probably not be happening immediately after a storm, right? So you don't have the conflict like you do with the schools, where you want the people to move out of the shelter. If it takes a bit of time for them to recover their personal situations, I think it's also an opportunity to do that without disrupting other activities. So again, this is a process. The proposals being sent to the Recovery Bureau for them to assist with the further development of it, with the idea that this is a project that could possibly be funded via the recovery funds. So, secondly, I would like to talk about, we are arranging a construction sector stakeholder consultation meeting. So the idea is, number one, we've heard some feedback from the community that the reconstruction process is beginning to slow down. I mentioned previously this may have impacts in our policies regarding the incidental work permits. So we've set the date for March 19th at 4 p.m., location to be determined, but probably will be here in this building. And the idea is that owners, managers of construction companies, but also building supply companies, anybody that's related to the construction sector, so air conditioning, anything that's related to that sector would be invited. And the idea is to get feedback from them in terms of how they see the reconstruction process going, what are their future anticipated needs for labor, right? Is there still a shortage of labor on the island? Explain our concerns about continuation of the incidental work permits, and what are some of the challenges they're finding with government or with the reconstruction process in terms of bottlenecks. What can we as government do to streamline that process? Then we would also think to use the opportunity to explain to the construction sector what are some of the opportunities we see coming up via the projects that are going to be funded by the World Bank Trust Fund. So in other words, there's a number of projects, shelter projects, reconstruction projects, and what we see is sometimes that the local participation in terms of the tendering process isn't as robust as we'd like to see. So we'd like to perhaps discuss with them, explain to them how the process works, and I think also it's an opportunity for the sector to give feedback in terms of the process. Do they find that it is inviting? Do they find that they're too complicated? What is their feedback on that process? And as well, we'd like to work in the possibility for SEDV to perhaps give a little bit of an introduction or a discussion with them in terms of compliance, what is expected from them, and again, feedback from them in terms of what are their challenges and how we can better streamline that process. So again, that is March 19th at 4 p.m. Those that are interested, actually, they can contact the cabinet. The phone number for the cabinet for VSA is 520-2767. The last topic I'd like to touch on briefly, as you know, we've started with some discussions about general health insurance, and I realize that within the community there's already quite some discussions about it. And so the thinking from the ministry is we are going to try and use these Wednesday press conferences as an opportunity also to bit by bit educate and sensitize the community as to what are some of the issues that we're really dealing with. So as we look at our current health insurance sector, the way we finance our health industry, clearly, and there's no dispute from anybody, not from government, not from SFV, that there are structural, fundamental issues within our system. And this is even from already before 10-10-10. Many of these funds already had financial issues. We see it in the community. We hear it too often. Too many people have issues accessing proper health insurance, right? And so if you can't access health insurance, that means you have a problem accessing health care, or it causes a big financial burden to you. And very often what we see is that these shortcomings end up coming back to government. Just to give you an example, right? There was a car accident, the driver of the car was driving, and the passenger was injured in the car, right? So the driver's vehicle insurance covers passengers only up to 90,000 guilders. And lo and behold, of course, the medical costs exceeded the 90,000 guilders. So what happens? Government gets a phone call from the insurance company saying, this individual has a problem. We only cover up to 90,000 guilders. Government, if you don't step in, this person's got a problem. So in a sense, we already have a form of universal health insurance, right? Many of the people, you know that, people in our community who have financial challenges, who can't afford health insurance, who can't afford their health care costs, they have the possibility by law to come to government and apply for a medical aid card. So many of the people here already have access to it, but the way that our system is organized, it isn't very efficient, it isn't very cost effective, and our goal as a ministry is to reorganize how we finance our healthcare system, making sure that it's sustainable. So, of course, we want the entire healthcare sector to be financially sustainable, so we're looking at the entire sector in terms of consumption, in terms of how we generate premiums, how do we make it financially sustainable? And we operate from a basic fundamental belief that access to healthcare is a basic human right. And as a community, as we go forward with this discussion about do we want to have some form of general health insurance, we need to agree on certain basic principles as we go forward in these discussions. Number one, of course, we want it to be financially sustainable. We know that our current system is not financially sustainable. So whatever we're doing now can't continue. There has to be some change. We want people's contributions to be equitable, right? Everyone should contribute their fair share. I think that's a principle that all of those in our community would agree with. And do we agree that every resident here should have access to health care or access to health insurance? And if not, the consequence of what we're saying is this group should not have access to health insurance. And therefore, that means as a community, we're accepting, we're prepared that this person will not access health care and the consequences are for that person, and we're just going to stand by as spectators and watch. As a community, we need to decide, is that the kind of community that we want to live in or not? So again, we're starting with our stakeholder consultations. We have PAHO agreeing to come in to help to support our discussions. As a matter of fact, we've reached out to Aruba and Curacao as well. One of the comments I've heard is, oh, but this is financially not sustainable in Aruba or Curacao. Well, I'd like to let the people hear it from the horse's mouth, and we're inviting the people from the healthcare sector from Aruba and Curacao as well, that they can come and let people listen to them, what their experiences are. You know, we're open to making the process better. We welcome the stakeholder consultations. As I said, status quo cannot be how we continue. And we're all about changing it, making it better. And if other people have constructive solutions, we are certainly open to listening that and to reforming our process. We believe that what we've done is quality work, and we believe it's in the best interest of those in the community. Again, those who are interested in arranging for consultations, they can reach out to the cabinet at, again, 520-2767. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Lee, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Minister of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment, and Infrastructure, the Honorable Miklos Hiterson, to address you. Minister Hiterson.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Good morning, Deputy Prime Minister, fellow ministers, press, and audience members viewing and listening. In 2010, St. Martin established the first marine park, the Man of War Shoal Marine Park. At the moment, there are no formally established land-based protected areas, even though the establishment of designated conservation areas is mentioned in several important framework documents, including our Constitution, our National Recovery and Resilience Plan, and the governing program. With a recent approval from the Council of Ministers, the Ministry of RAMI now has the intention to begin the preparation for the creation of the first terrestrial or land-based protected area in St. Martin. Research has shown that the creation of nature parks can have positive impact on St. Martin's flora and fauna and benefit our culture, tourism, and education. It also raises the aesthetic value of the island. While several areas of St. Martin have been recognized as important for conservation, it is not feasible to establish all of the identified areas right now. The area which require the least effort and will yield the most rewards will be the ones projected to be protected first. It should then be of no surprise that the Emilia Wilson Estate and Century Hill has been identified for the location of the first possible terrestrial nature park of St. Martin. One of the most compelling reasons for this choice is the Emilia Wilson Estate and Century Hill area provides the opportunity to later increase the conservation area to include the Colby Hill, St. Peter's Hill, Concordia Hill, Marigot Hill, Weymouth Hill, and Mount William Hills. Future expansion also provides for the opportunity for eventual cooperation with Friends St. Martin. The ministry is at the beginning stages of this project. There is still a lot to be researched, strategically planned, and executed. For example, the establishment of a nature park requires a national decree, which includes several layers of approval. Final agreements with the Nature Foundation and other relevant stakeholders would need to be finalized, and a park management plan and funding structure would have to be worked out so that the park can be self-sustaining. This is not something that will happen in the short term. However, I share this news to let the general public know that while we are still in the recovery phase, this government is looking ahead and are continually seeking ways to build a more resilient and sustainable island, not just economically, but environmentally as well. Moving on, sometime within this week or next week, I expect to sign off on the building permit for Balaclava NV. This is the company that will be executing the building of the Planet Hollywood Hotel that replaces the former Great Bay Sonesta Beach Hotel. Next steps after signing will be the placing of the permit on public review for 6 weeks. The exact dates will be publicized in the media within short, and interested stakeholders will then have the opportunity to come to the VROMI consultation room here at the Government Administration Building and view the permit. If there are any objections to the permit, individuals can put their objection in writing addressed to my person, and the process will then start. The eventual construction of this hotel will bring the much needed jobs and room inventory to the island. Next, as reported this week in the media, on Friday, February 15th, I was able to release the sum of 1 million guilders to the St. Martin Housing Development Foundation. This 1 million guilders represents a percentage of unpaid subsidy indexations and other compensations owed to the St. Martin Housing Development Foundation for annual rental subsidies of tenants. The foundation intends to carry out much-needed repairs to the various homes with the monies. The money was acquired through funds held in a revolving account that the foundation manages on behalf of government through a management agreement established in 2010, which holds the revenues of the Hope Estate Phase 1 and Phase 2 projects. On Friday last, the 22nd, I paid a visit to the Belvedere Housing Complex, where I was accompanied by the foundation's officials and was given a tour of a few of the damaged homes that are to be repaired. I want to thank the residents of the damaged homes for their patience. Through these funds and the funds from the Recovery Trust Fund, many of the homes have started to be repaired, and the repairs will continue throughout the next month. This concludes my press briefing for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Heaterson, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, the Honorable Wycliffe Smith, to address you. Minister Smith.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roach, and pleasant good morning to all, especially to my colleagues and to the Department of Communications, members of the press, as well as those listening and viewing via radio, television, or social media. Good morning, Sualiga. Literacy Week. This week is being celebrated as Literacy Week. Reading is very important for the development of the individual, as well as for the advancement of the country. Last week, all of the students of the Asher Stevens Elementary School demonstrated the importance of reading with a march through the streets of Phillipsburg. They wore costumes depicting the characters from some of the books that they had been reading. The entire school finalized their march in front of the steps of the government building, and the youngest children of the group handed me a book on leadership. As leaders and elders, we must set the example for children to follow. Allow them to see you reading and read with them. It doesn't matter if you choose to read the Bible, the newspaper, or bedtime stories. As Frank Serafini said, and I quote, "There is no such thing as a child who hates to read. There are only children who have not yet found the right book," unquote. A workshop for the teachers of the St. Martin Vocational Teachers Training School. Last week, in continuing the intervention at the St. Martin Vocational Training School, a 2-day workshop was held for the teachers of that school. The workshop dealt with how to deal with behavioral challenges that teachers faced in the classroom and in the schoolyard. I have set up a task force to deal with the various challenges and problems at that school. The task force is currently busy with the plans for the way forward for the improvement of the school, for both the management, for the teachers, and for the students. As Minister of Education, Culture, Youth, and Sport, I've been invited to attend a community information session, a town hall meeting, being hosted by the board of the St. Martin Christian Party. This session will be held at the Rupert Maynard Community Center in St. Peters on Saturday, March the 2nd, 2019, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. I will be there to answer questions and share information with the community as it relates to the duties and the activities of the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth, and Sport. The Gifted Awards. On Sunday evening, I had the pleasure of attending the regal event of the Gifted Foundation as they honored 43 students from numerous high schools who were nominated for their excellence in academics, athletics, community service, expressive arts, and in leadership. All the nominees are worthy of the recognition and the celebration, and the 2019 Young Kings and Young Queens are well deserving of their awards. Kickboxing, I would like to congratulate Omar Marsham, who recently participated in a kickboxing training session in Amsterdam. Omar concluded his participation in the training by claiming a win by TKO, technical knockout, in the first round. Omar, keep representing yourself, your club, and St. Martin well, with our flag flying high. And also from the Netherlands, Avianca Aventurin, I wish also to recognize the first appointed youth mayor of Amsterdam, Miss Avianca Aventurin, who's of St. Martin parentage. We wish her much success in her term as she sets the pace for others to follow. The Department of Sports has chosen to highlight the work of Iviane Luisa, an exceptional swimmer. Miss Luisa has won several medals in local and regional swimming competitions, the latest being 7 medals at one meet in Curaçao last December. Iviane, we congratulate you and encourage you to continue to excel. Keep setting the standard for others to follow, because sports matter. As a point of information, I wish to remind the public and foundations which may seek to request donations from the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport that a hard copy letter of request with any other necessary supporting documents should be delivered to the government building at the reception desk. Emailed requests for donation from the ministry or from the minister are insufficient for processing and will prove counterproductive for the individual or for the organization that is making that request. The St. Martin Doet. As we approach another St. Martin Doet for the weekend of March 15th and 16th, 2019, I encourage all members of the community to volunteer in the rebuilding and beautification projects. We all have a part to play, and if we unite and focus as a team and as a community, we will certainly achieve much more. Art supplies handed over to the NIA. Yesterday, Tuesday, February 26th, I had the pleasure to officially receive a variety of visual art materials that were donated to the NIA, the National Institute of Arts, by an art organization in the Netherlands called the Orange Company. After Hurricane Irma, the Orange Company reached out to the NIA to see how they could help our children by using the medium of art. The Orange Company was able to get a donation of art supplies like paint and brushes, easels and canvas from Royal Talens. Royal Talens is a large company located in Apeldoorn in the Netherlands that supplies all sorts of arts and craft materials. In addition to ensuring that the NIA and schools and artists receive art supplies, the Orange Company has received paintings from 2 St. Martin artists, and it has organized a traveling exhibition in the Netherlands. This means that the work of Roland Richardson and Tess Verheij will be exhibited in several cities and towns in the Netherlands. St. Martin wishes to thank Royal Talens, the Orange Company, the Cabinet of the Minister Plenipotentiary, and our ministers there, the Honorable Jorien Wuiten and Michel Summersol. Thanks also to Arlene Halley, Director of the NIA, for being the liaison, and also thanks to our artists for their participation. Thank you very much, and I'll be awaiting any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Minister Smith, for your opening remarks. The Minister of Tourism, Economic Affairs, Transport, and Telecommunication will not be making any opening statements, but is available for any questions the members of the media may have. We now move on to the question and answer session. Stephen Cerillion of PJ82 Radio, you have the floor.
Thank you. Ministers, good morning. My question is for the Minister of ESA. You mentioned of the multi-purpose facility. A location for this facility, has that been identified? And what is the initial budgeted amount for the building?
In discussions with the steering committee previously, so I mean, this isn't the first time that I've broached the subject with the steering committee nor the recovery group. And ideally, they would prefer not to purchase land, right? So as a principle in the way the funds are being used. So the way the project is being developed would be that we work with a partner, so a public-private partnership where somebody would put the land in, and then the idea would be that from the revenues of the building pay off the land. So we're in discussions with a couple of possible locations. So at this point, I wouldn't say that we have a location picked out. We are in conversations with a couple possible locations. And also, given the amount of size of the land that we're looking for, it's fairly substantial. Let me see if I have it real quick. I don't know exactly where I have it, but the size, I mean, given the size of the building itself, and of course the parking that would need to be attached to it, it's a fairly substantial size of land that we'd be looking for. In terms of cost, and I would say that's why we want to continue with the feasibility studies and the development. Really, we've looked at just throwing numbers out there, so I would call this worst case scenario. You know, we're looking somewhere around 26 million if we include the shelter, convention center, as well as library, CMARC, and the museum. But I think that these numbers are on the high side because it depends on if we buy flat land, if it's one flat building. So it's really, I wouldn't use it as what we think the project would cost. I would say that our thinking is that this is kind of worst case or highest case scenario, just to start the discussions going. And also all types of requests have been made in terms of we want this office or this space. So it all needs to be looked at and sort of look at where we have overlapping areas that we could consolidate. So I wouldn't want that budget to kind of live a life of its own. I think that's part of the first phase of the ongoing development of it. How much space do we really need? Can we consolidate? That's all part of the study that we would like the World Bank to start with.
Over 20 million.
Stephen, can you get the mic, please?
Dollars. Dollars.
Thank you, Minister
And
Lee.
sorry, just to keep in mind, because we're building it purpose-built as a shelter, right? That's the main objective. So ideally, we would be looking at, I would assume, a poured-in-place concrete structure. We don't want to go to steel, like a prefabricated structure. So understand that there's probably additional costs versus if you just did a straight-up, call it commercial-type building, you want this purpose-built to withstand, all types of disasters. So that might be part of the contributing factor to the costs as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister Lee. Andrew Bishop of St. Martin News Online, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning to the ministers. Minister Gitterson, we have the FOGA project in Dutch Quarter. Since the project has been built, nothing has been done with the roads. It seems as though these are the forgotten people of St. Martin. Do you know if government has a policy on it, and if this road will be fixed who the land belongs to, what could be done?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Cerillion. I understood last week you had the same question.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, sorry. Andrew Bishop, sorry. Sorry. You had the same question last week, and I didn't quite understood the question last week, and still, because Foga Estate is here in Sucker Garden.
The one in Dutch Quarter I'm talking about, sir.
You're talking about, oh, the emergency homes. Oh, we do have a list of roads to be paved, and I'm not sure, secondary roads, and I'm not too sure if that is on the list, and if it's not, the reason why not, but it is supposed to be. But I can have my PR officer reply to you on that in detail.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Peterson. Lyndon Brown of BCN TV, you have the floor.
Good morning to the people of St. Martin and to the ministers. Question to Minister Gittison and the dump. Oftentimes people mention the dump, but I just want to change it. The dump has financial resources, Minister. Do you thinking of recycle? Because there's a lot of financial asset that goes to the dump. Correct. The government of St. Martin ever thinking about recycling all of these resources and where other people are making money, exporting these resources away?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Brown. The answer is yes, definitely. We are in preparation to start our recycling and reuse program, and it's still in the beginning phase, Mr. Brown. Thank you. So the answer is definitely yes. We're also already reusing and accumulating the steel at steel crushers. We're just waiting for it to reach a certain capacity and to work out some other gray areas, but we are already engaged in recycling and reuse in St. Martin, and it is the intent of this government and hopefully other governments to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Peterson. Andrew Dick of the Daily Herald, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning to all ministers. Minister Lee, concerning the same building, the multipurpose building, how would it coincide with a theater, for example? Because I know there were discussions before about having a entertainment center or something of the sort. Different locations were mentioned before. So how would it coincide with a multi-purpose building and now, with the theater and the multi-purpose building, if any?
That is exactly the idea. Okay. So what are we really talking about? Is from a shelter perspective, we're talking about a big, wide open space that could be subdivided, and then you could have individuals with cots in the room. Similar to what you've seen in the US, you'd see it in some of the sporting stadiums, etc., right? So in the end, you have a big, wide open space, floor space that could be used for different events. The idea is that there would be seating, bleacher-type seating, that could retract back to the walls. So when you want big open floor space, you retract the seating. So let's say for a convention center, you want just open floor space, the seating would retract back to the wall. If you want to have theater, so let's say you want a sporting event, because the sporting event we've calculated, I think, was big enough for 4 basketball courts. But for a tournament type setting, I mean, that's what we would envision, right? That you could do regional tournament type events. You would want to then put the seating and then have one main court for a competition, like a regional type competition. That same setup you could use then for a theater, right? So you would have a stage, you could bring the seats in, and then you could have seating to view cultural theater type events as well.
You may follow.
But how would that affect the existing facilities that we have already? Because I know they have they're on the state already, and of course you're trying to rebuild them. So how would that coincide? I don't know if the Minister of Education could also chime in that.
Well, I would certainly see it as complementary. Certainly, it isn't the idea to take away from any of the other facilities that are there. This would obviously be geared, because of the size, towards much larger type events. So I wouldn't see it competing. It isn't the idea that it takes away. Sorry?
It's a multi-purpose building. So
Sure.
okay.
Thank you, Minister Lee. We now move on to the second round of questions. Stephen Cirillian, you have the floor.
Mr. Vigas again. For some time now, the anti-poverty platform has been seeking a dialogue with the Ministry of TIAT, the Ministry of General Affairs, and of course the Ministry of VSA. They are basically saying that they have forwarded several letters, and up to now, none of those have been acknowledged. In fact, they went as far as saying that they have filed a complaint with the Ombudsman because of your lack of response. How soon do you intend to at least acknowledge and at least give them a hearing?
Thank you, Stephen. First of all, I think we regularly have spoken to them. And as a matter of fact, we have a meeting already scheduled, both the Minister of TIAT and myself, for tomorrow afternoon. So I'm not sure what they're referring to. They've sent requests for information. The Cabinet is dealing with those requests. Some of the requests, I think, are reasonable. Some of them, I'm not sure, are based on government policy. I'm not sure that they're executable. But we have, in general, this government and this Council of Ministers has a very open door policy with all stakeholders. So, yes, Mr. Yesaroon reaches out to us frequently, and I believe that we respond in an appropriate time. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister Lee. Andrew Bishop, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Rodika. Mr. Smith. Minister Smith, we've learned that The Hague, in the capacity of Mr. Knops, has asked that the ministers give up part of their salary. Is the Council of Ministers agreeing with this? Because what he's saying is that if there is need for any more monies, he's not going to facilitate it. Are you going to lose some of your salary?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Bishop. As you know, as a member of the St. Martin Christian Party, that is one of the things that we championed and also brought a motion last year during the budget debate to Parliament. The motion was referred to the Council of Ministers at that time. I can say that the Council of Ministers, the Minister of Finance indicated that to change the salary structure would take quite a lengthy legal process. And so ministers, but also parliamentarians, are requested to voluntarily give up. And so Council of Ministers have signed a release that they're willing to give up 10% of their salary, and it will be up to the parliamentarians to do the same.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister Smith. Lyndon Brown, you have the floor.
Question to Minister Johnson. Minister Johnson, forgiveness is necessary. Over the past months and days, Minister, your character have been paved very negatively. Are you willing now, all the allegations are cancelled, are dismissed? Do you ready to say forgiveness to those who have so badly hurt your feelings?
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your statement and your question. And of course, my feelings have not been hurt at all. You know, the opposition has a long-standing history being opposition. They have the most experience doing that. So I can understand their modus operandi and their reason for doing so. They have the experience in opposition, so you do what you do best. So that is their call. But, you know, I live by one simple, infamous quote that what God has ordained, no man can destroy. So I wish anyone that wants to destroy anyone's character, you know, the best. I know what I have to do, which is to continue to serve the people of this country, everyone on St. Martin, and of course, those with ill intent or ill agendas, eventually karma has its way of catching up to you.
Thank you, Minister Johnson. Andrew Dick, you have the floor.
Yes, Minister Johnson, concerning the ex-staffer, a letter was sent to him concerning him paying back for the trip that he went on. Can you tell us, to close this matter, will the ministry pay all the fees that he's owed, or what's the reason for the letter that was sent?
Thank you, Andrew, for your question. And of course, the Ministry of Finance and of course the Receiver's Office has to do their due diligence, of course, for the Ministry of TIAT and in particular the Cabinet. All members that have worked for the Cabinet are entitled to their payment, and that is busy being processed at this time for sure.
Thank you, Minister Johnson. We now move on to the third round of questions. Stephen Cerulean, you have the floor.
Mr. Johnson, the 2019 39th edition of the Heineken Regatta will officially start tomorrow. Government is subsidizing the Heineken Regatta. In fact, they have been doing so for a number of years now. Has any studies been done to at least tap into how much the Heineken Regatta has been at least contributing to the economy of St. Martin?
Thank you, Stephen. Of course, we have initial statistics via the Tourist Bureau in regards to a percentage of about 28% in regards to those persons who are first-time guests, first-time visiting the island. So we're still going through the stats, and of course, the assessment for this year continues. You know, we're in a post-Hurricane Irma era in regards to things being extraordinary. So there is other variations, there's other factors to consider when looking at numbers, because we're not fully restored in terms of hotel inventory, in terms of infrastructure. So there is that need to have that assessment and then compare it to previous figures. And what we've been doing over the course of time for the ministry is looking primarily at the year of 2016, where it was more at a normal standard, to compare figures, to compare what room inventories were like when it was fully operational, and of course to look at numbers that have a more substantial full restoration of the island. So indeed, that will be studied for this year once again, and then the economic benefits, of course, will be further explained and provided to the public as well.
Thank you, Minister Johnson. Andrew Bishop, you have the floor.
Minister Johnson, do we have any statistics on the amount of people that you're expecting to come to the island, tourists that is, for 2019?
In terms of cruise passengers, in terms of stay-over passengers?
Cruise passengers, stay-over passengers, and the people who come through the airport.
You know, for the airport, we had an initial beginning. We had 1.8 million passengers that were coming through our airport at the time. The number continues to rise. At present, we're about 800,000 throughput. That is, of course, arrival and departure of passengers. That is through the airport. For the arrival via cruise passengers, that is 1.5. We expected to exceed that once again to about 1.6, 1.7. And of course, the projection going forward for cruise passengers is to exceed even record-breaking numbers, 2-3 million, once the necessary investments and overall vision for the port is realized. Same for the full restoration of the destination. Once the island is fully restored, hotel rooms are back up to 100% levels. And of course, the island itself then is ready. We are expected to have what is to be the best top-notch destination in the Northeastern Caribbean. If you look at, for instance, our hotel room products in general, we're going to have now the opportunity to have new rooms, additional room accommodations. For instance, Sonesta Maho is busy underway on the 28th of this month, which is a few days away. We will have the welcome back flight of Sunwing. That is going to bring an estimated 100 plus visitors to our island yet again. Of course, I provided the Council of Ministers and even by extension the coalition, a full 12-page report of my recent visit to Routes America. There we had numerous meetings with numerous airlines in reference to returning to the island or coming to the island for the first time. So like every working visit that I've had, I've submitted a formal report for the working visit and to substantiate the economic benefits of not only the destination, but also for government to be represented at those forums. So indeed, Mr. Bishop, it is looking very promising going ahead, and those numbers, of course, will only rise as St. Martin continues to rise like a phoenix from the ashes.
Thank you, Minister Johnson. Lyndon Brown, you have the floor.
Question to Minister Smith. Minister Smith, there's a lot of recruit coming out of NIPA. Did you do a study in the different category where people are enhancing their skill? How much, what's the number of human resources needed?
Mr. Brown, there is no study at this time in terms of need. We learned from the NIPA board. We had a meeting with them last week that the students, graduates that they're turning out are able to find work. And this is something that we would look into and to study and see how it coincides with the graduates that are being turned out from a school like this.
What are the different categories? Because Minister Lee mentioned recently that the construction work are going down.
Well, there's business administration, there's nursing, there's social work workers, there are teachers' assistants, there are masonry, carpentry, mechanics, a lot of vocational subjects they're offering.
Thank you, Minister Smith. We now move on to the final question. Andrew Dick, you have the floor.
Minister Johnson, concerning the airport, I know that the CEO did sound the alarm last week concerning the salaries. Any update as far as the workers getting their salaries this week?
Thank you, Andrew, for the question. Of course, for me, it has been the number one concern becoming minister in charge of TIAT is the welfare, first of all, of the over 279 employees from the get-go. That has been documented time and time again, internally, externally, in media reports and otherwise. And indeed, I was briefed up to late yesterday afternoon that the instructions were provided to the bank to make the payment. Cash flow was sufficient enough from the airport itself to process the February payroll, and of course that is welcoming news at this time for the employees and of course for the airport in general. So I'm elated that the employees indeed, based on the latest briefings from airport management, will be paid for the month of February, and of course the other arrangements are still underway.
Thank you, Minister Johnson. Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, radio listeners, and online viewers, this brings us to the end of the live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, February 27, 2019. For rebroadcast, tune in every evening at 7 p.m. on St. Martin Cable TV. For video on demand, log on to the official government's website at www.stmartingov.org. I would also like to encourage the general public to tune in to St. Martin Cable TV at 7 p.m. every evening for the Heineken Regatta Special brought to you by the Department of Communication. On behalf of the Department of Communication, I'm Roleika Roach, and do have a pleasant day further.